Hello and welcome to episode 45. I think we're at episode 45 now of the CIS and Senteon webinar series where we're doing a deep dive into individual settings. And this season is all about the Chrome browser. I know, Maria, we talked backstage. You got some of your own opinions on that, but we'll get into those here in a moment. So before I introduce our guest, just some housekeeping for everyone. These webinars are weekly. They are educational, and we are doing them to really raise awareness on the importance of hardening. And we did build a platform that really automates a lot of the security called Senteon. Senteon is built for the remediation, the enforcement, the monitoring, change tracking, and reporting on well over 1,000 different configurations. So I'll go ahead and share how to show some of these replays and make sure you stay up to date with the webinars. If we can just highlight that on the screen. Perfect. So right here is our website, senteon.co. It is in the comments as well. But from here, you are able to find the repository of the videos, as well as the blog write-ups that we do after every episode. So I do try to do a little bit of a fun theme for each episode. So if you like and enjoy those, feel free to share them. Outside of that, you will be invited to sign up and have access to 100 free assessments that you can use as sales reports or just presentations to learn where you currently sit. To gain access to those, you're just going to hit the login button right here, and that's going to take you to a sign-up page. But the cool thing here is we have a freemium version even. So with this, you are going to be able to see all of the settings that we talk about in this webinar, and you can see exactly how they fit across different regulatory requirements. So no more guessing with what settings need to be applied, what you need to do. The answer key is right here. And the best part is, if you ever don't know what one of these settings are, you can click right into it, and straight from the CIS repository themselves, they will give you the pathway, the description, rationale and impact, even the machine key, and everything that you need to be successful. Senteon does take this a step further and actually shows the explanation as to why it fits into another framework and why it is important there. Outside of that, guys, we do also have a resource hub that is open to the public. You can learn about hardening, go in depth with these settings, and most important, we do have our future webinar schedule. So if you want to join in weekly, toss these on your calendar. I do keep this up to date, and look at this amazing guest list. I mean, and of course, speaking of guests, I mean, we can get to the real show now. With housekeeping concluded, Maria, I mean, thank you for joining the show. You were someone I got to meet through Matt Lee's CIS working group. We got to meet in person at RSA. I mean, all around great person. Thank you for joining, and please introduce yourself a little bit.
And we also got to hang out with CIS for like a full afternoon and have like brain wars in there. I felt like it was a little war room.
So yeah, we met some like celebrities too. I feel like Tony Sager, I believe, and we were just like meeting all these people. I was like, wow, CIS is showing up.
It was RSA was a cool experience, and being able to hang out in that capacity was also pretty cool. Well, thank you. I'm Maria. I'm founder and CEO of Praxis Data Security, and what we do is we are basically an outsourced GRC firm, and we help companies get through navigate all those compliances, not on the technical side. So I always I was talking to Zach before. I'm like, remember, I'm not a technical person. I'm a GRC person. So if it is a policy or how it affects it or why it's there, that's where I can comment.
But I'm going to ask you to, explain why is hardening important to GRC, right? I mean, that's something that matters.
Well, and it will get me into a whole conversation of the hardening, because since I've met you, and really I've been using the word hardening for so many reasons, and hardening your cybersecurity program in general, making sure that you have that ongoing governance and that ongoing monitoring, and anytime there's an update, and making sure that you stay on top of those. I've kind of translated into the GRC programs and the cybersecurity plan and programs for a company, just like your Senteon is doing. In the technical sense of it.
I think that's one of the biggest value props for us. I mean, there's thousands of these policies and controls, and how is any MSP is our general focus, which I know you're aware of that. how is any MSP supposed to have a single employee dedicated to staying up to date on all of this?
It's crazy and maddening, and it's hard without some of that. Some, like I said, having something dedicated to for every piece of your technology to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of opportunity. I think just for security vendors as a whole, be the SME in your category and be that solution that stays up to date with these changes, because it's too much work on the MSP, on the enterprise business owner, because resources, right? We need to rely on our vendors, and Senteon is doing its best to be that vendor.
Yeah, and having vendors that also give the education kind of. I'm very impressed with, and even I did the tour of Senteon a few months ago, and all of the resources you have to translate it into these benchmarks, and explain why. And as I was prepping for the show and seeing how we're going into each individual one of them is such a value for MSPs to stay on top of it and understand why those things are important.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the shout out there, but let's get into you. My reoccurring question, Maria, where is the most interesting place you've taken a customer call?
I've taken customer calls, as for a while I was traveling so much that I have a lot of answers, but if I'm thinking about it on the fly, that somewhere that's not an airport or something silly like that, I had an in-person at downtown Disney in
Oh,
Anaheim. And the problem is that then I had a back-to-back virtual meeting afterwards. And I will tell you, there are speakers blowing music in every inch of downtown Disney. And so the most interesting, can I give two though? Can I?
this is your show, please.
I found a corner of downtown Disney where I was crouched, and I put like my noise canceling, and it was before the noise canceling AirPods came
Hmm.
out, and I'm sitting there trying to like mute every time I talked and unmute, and I couldn't hear them. But downtown was maybe the most difficult, but the most unique is actually recent, also in California,
Oh,
and I live in Texas.
maybe
I
you shouldn't go to California for this customer stuff. That might be the thing.
I was traveling um down from down like south SoCal, and I was going up. It was right before RSA. Actually, I was headed.
Oh,
It wasn't for RSA, but it was. I have a friend that lives up there, and I was going to PCH, and I hit a block that had no service, and I thought I was going to have service, and the PCH was closed. At a certain point, I had to turn back around. I was going to be late for this meeting. I went into this little town that's over by Paso Robles, and I found, and no restaurant had Wi-Fi. And they said I could go into the local library, and I went into the library, but it was teeny tiny and quiet, and I went into the bathroom.
oh no.
I took a customer call in the stall of the bathroom, and a teeny tiny in California with no Wi. This only place had Wi-Fi, and I had to be loud. So that's the most.
Only webinar series you can get a bathroom story like that. And the most important question, was the customer's situation or question answered?
Yeah, it was. It was. We it was a large project that we were working on, and it was more of a status meeting and kind of understanding what they're needing. It was on a framework and controls and evidence and things like that. So yes, and they had no idea I was in a bathroom in a library.
I love that. All right, that's an amazing story. We'll see if that answer gets topped by the next few weeks of episodes, but that's going to be a tough one. All right. Before we enter today's episode and to really set the agenda, we do have 12 settings to discuss today. We will be getting into that right after this follow-up question. And then after that, we'll talk about how these settings maybe relate to MITRE, talk about why they are important from a business perspective outside of just risk. So to set the stage, that's what is coming up. But Maria, you have the background really strong in GRC, but specifically NIST. And if I remember correctly, you were kind of a NIST diehard or a NIST prodigy. And
Conversation up. CIS is gonna love you right now.
but give that background. What caused you to start in the NIST world, and how was that transition or mutual respect in learning CIS?
So I will say I started in NIST because that is where I received all my training, and where I received my training. It was reading the NIST documentations. The NIST 830 on how to conduct a risk assessment was one of my first documents I ever read. And then I mean, I could cite NIST, which NIST document goes to what, and things like that. And so I think it's always starts with where you start from. And to me, since that's where I was kind of born and raised, is in the NIST
Hmm.
world. I could understand all those. I could take the NIST 853 high level and go,
Hmm.
oh, for this company, I could pick which ones I thought were relevant. And after I spoke to a company and, understood which ones were applicable to them and why, and build a security program that way. And I met Matt Lee, and he and I, if he listens to this podcast, he'll probably be laughing, because he and I, the first conversation, and also at CompTIA, Wayne Selk and I have had, they're like, you always want to argue. I'm like, I'm not arguing. I just have an opinion about things. But I was like, well, I don't understand CIS because it's such, especially before implementation groups, but it's, they were at levels before IG. But I was like, this is just such few things. A fault for Maria. Thank you, Matt. But I did. I didn't understand why a company would go in that direction. And yeah,
Hmm.
I was more in the enterprise space. And
Sure.
even then, now I see such value for especially enterprise to go into those groups. And yes, I will give Matt a a good, like all these back and forths, and I was like, oh, you know what, you were right. And he's like, aha, I knew you. um and then I dove into, I spoke to CIS about this. I had a very large project for an enterprise company where it was all CIS, and
Hmm.
we were implementing IT3 and in a different business unit. So I really understood, especially for the users, especially for the small business. When I built Praxis, it was for small businesses, to be able to have these building blocks. Somebody that
Yeah.
has no security program, bringing in a NIST and going, here are 258 controls that you should really implement, and granularity was just not feasible. And so for the good, and also for the mission of securing
Hmm.
companies, the CIS is a wonderful tool to go, here are building blocks, and let's go from there. So to answer your question, I was born in the world of NIST and
Yep.
lived in that world, and I and I especially after getting involved in talking to a lot of CIS, um, people at CIS, understanding how they're not competing, they're on
No.
the mission, they're on the same mission of, oh, this is really, let's start with the building blocks for securing companies at the base level and then grow maturity. And it really helps show that growth, and facilitates the growth in cybersecurity maturity for a company. And also, even on the GRC side, even though I have some beef with the fact that they don't have enough governance in there and documentation
We
needs,
might be able to talk about that today.
they don't have the documentation requirements in CIS. But even then, even if you're just doing your assessments, you can start documenting. I know people hate that word, documenting the maturity of a company, and it makes it easier. So
Absolutely. And I'll give CIS a little bit more praise before we transition topics. We talked about hanging out with them at RSA, them having a booth and getting to meet the real leaders. I mean, Charity Otwell, she's director of critical security controls, has been on the show. Phyllis Lee is, I think, her boss, but talk to her. She's been an influence, right? So seem to be very community focused. Did you get that from NIST? And I'm not trying to bash anyone, but I don't know if NIST has that.
they actually, they don't have. First of all, NIST is a free government tool,
Okay.
so we start there. NIST does. I think that people don't know that, because it's a government, it's from the government, free for the people to use. That if you go to the NIST website, you can actually comment on any single one of the frameworks. There
Very
there
cool.
is a revision schedule, and
Hmm.
I did go to DC, and I met some of the NIST contributors and writers, and they even when I spoke to them, I think they're just because it's NIST, it's harder to get. identify. But if you go to the NIST website, you can see who the authors are. Like if you read you have to go through all the documentation, all the publications, but you can see who the authors are, and you have more access to them than people think. And with the revision schedule, there is a whole for all of the frameworks, and that was not me. I'm gonna say
You're a liar. It was totally you.
it's not me. um, and we had and you can, and as the public can comment, even if it's not in a revision year, and they do read comments.
It's awesome. I mean, that's really cool to know. I don't know if everyone knows that.
It's I don't feel it's as accessible and as community focused as CIS is, and that's, I think, the other props I give to CIS of being accessible. And really, I haven't met anybody at CIS that isn't happy to answer a question or to have a conversation. If I haven't met anybody at CIS that isn't happy to do so.
I love hearing that. All right, with that, let's start this transition. So while we pull up this first slide, I do want to give another shout out to the CIS working group that we were a part of and where we met. So this is effectively a working group where we're working to identify the controls, what control feeds into another control. And ultimately, I believe one of the many end goals is to help vendors attest and prove where they fit into these controls to better service the enterprise, the MSP, on understanding their gaps. Because how are you going to improve if you don't know where your shortcomings are? So very awesome. And I'm going to give another note at the end of the webinar. Hopefully by next week, I can share a QR code, but we are working to create a Discord server channel all about the CIS community, and the working group will be part of that. So very awesome. Let's kick into these slides. So we are talking about the CIS benchmarks to secure a Chrome browser. Before we show this first setting, Maria, let's first dive in. Why do we need to secure our browser, and why should it be Chrome or maybe something else?
Unpopular opinion for some people, maybe. When you asked me to be on here, I'm like, but why Chrome? Like Chrome? Ouch. I'm like, there are other browsers out there that we can have a lot more security controls and configurations to. My experience, Chrome isn't the first thing I would use at an enterprise or at a company. It To me, it doesn't, I don't feel like you can have the biggest grasp on security settings and configurations. I'm glad we're having this, because there's some of these that are like, why wouldn't you implement this or configure it this way? But I think that it's not as like, you can't, logical, some of these things, and how you configure them. And a lot of people maybe think that something's turned on or off, but you really have to go in and check them. And I just don't, I personally, and I'm not a technologist, so please don't come for me. But in my experience, when I am working with a company in their IT, we have to go through these and go, why is this on or off? And they're like, oh, I thought that was on. So it's, and they don't usually use Chrome. Like I see Chrome a lot of places because of those reasons. And why is it essential? Because your browser is a very big gateway into your environment, and every single user is using a browser. So
I think it's funny you say that, like it's obvious, and to us and probably the audience it is obvious. But one aspect that we keep talking about in a reoccurring theme in this, we're on episode 3 of this season. These settings will help mitigate a phish from being successful, right? It delays the execution, or it forces you to click an additional button. And we got Alex in the audience talking about Edge. I love that. Next season, we'll be talking about Edge. And a quick fun fact on that, these Chrome episodes, there's about 80 settings that we'll discuss. But when we get to Edge, they're a little bit more granular with 120 different options. So maybe we should.
There's pros and cons. Like there's a lot more options, and so there's a lot more work to configure maybe an Edge, because they have so many more settings. But it gives you the control of, like, we'll get into some of these where like I know we're having Origins one and insecure Origins. Just turn that off. But I think you can get more granular, say, and put exceptions in the other one and the other browsers. So
Absolutely. And you mentioned in your introduction of that, talking about needing to attest and explain why a setting is configured a certain way. I mean, by default, some of these are configured, some of them are by default like not configured, even if they do have a behavior that relates to not configured, but they're not explicitly set. So why is this so important for the MSP or the business owner to actually know what these settings are, or at least verify and know for sure they're set explicitly?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the ownership of the control. Like, and we talk a lot about like who's responsible and ownership, and having somebody that's responsible for this. So, for an MSP, if you are set to be the owner and responsible for settings, and it could, and we're getting into how you speak to your client, and the business owner is really at the end of the day the actual owner of this. So you have to express that to them and then educate them. But if there is an attack, if there is a vulnerability, if something, if there is an incident due to lack of configuration that could have been avoided by a configuration, and then go, hey, why, how did this happen? Why didn't it get done? Why weren't you responsible for it? Those are those legality, GRC documentation, CYA kind of things. That the real answer is important is that to secure and harden your business. And
you have an asset, you should know how the asset's configured.
exactly. But in the documentation side of it, it's not just liability, it's also due diligence. And as far as having the governance piece of it, it's proven, like, and I will talk about this on one of the other sides, is like on the notification side, is like you need to have notification set, just those are those reminders, and on the governance side, and then also assurance that those are done and that you're constantly checking them and making sure that they're still configured the way you configured them.
Yeah. Well, instead of hinting at some of these slides, let's dive into the first setting. So the first one we have here is going to be list of names that will bypass the HSTS policy check. So CIS does recommend to have this set to disabled. Could you kind of explain what this means? Anything that can bypass policy checks sounds a little scary to me, but what's this mean?
So I'm going to remind you one more time.
Okay, sorry.
Person, sir. But you said what I thought. I was like, well, anything that is bypassing a policy check doesn't, it'd be a no-brainer that it would be turned to disable.
Yes.
Because and I think we had talked about this, because it weakens the security. Like, if you're bypassing these policy checks, then we cannot. Then why do we have it? Why do we have a policy check?
I mean, that's the whole point. And to put this in like a real world example, like when what's somewhere you need to follow rules, whether it's a classroom, right? Your classroom, you have your student, right? There's rules. Raise your hand before you answer a question. Why should that rule only apply to some and not everyone, right? So this setting here is explaining like, hey, you need the rules, but also don't let people bypass the rules, right?
Yeah, and let them bypass it without, and we'll get into zero trust, but with just because, like, there's, again, and getting into further control of your configurations, there can be set other rules of why you would have to bypass. And also, I know there's a lot of times where like your client needs to get some work done, and it's like, I can't get to this, can you please disable this so I can get this piece of work done? That's a real world experience. We've all experienced it with customers. But again, going back to make sure it's returned and checked, because if not, then you're just allowing anything.
Well, let's expand on that, making sure it's returned and checked. So when that inbound, client ticket, hey, I can't do something, and because you're technical in this hypothetical, it's this setting that is blocking them from doing the action they're requesting. How would you recommend an MSP or business owner to go about creating an exception? And do they need to review this again, or is it just a time frame? Do you have any best practices you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things, and it kind of depends on how that MSP conducts their own governance plan. So these things happen, and like I said, many people forget to go back and reset or change that configuration back. I would say have a if there's a lot of this happening, then I would say have a internal policy to go and check this setting, or browser settings in general,
Hmm.
more than quarterly,
Yes.
to make sure that's happening, because you're running a business, you're working a business, like you said, resources, and or have a tool that sends you alerts or checks or does scans. Would Senteon do anything?
Senteon would. But
Um,
that's interesting. I want to expand a little bit on this because these configurations, a lot of people think, hey, I'm going to apply this group policy template this one time and then I'm done forever, right? This worked. I mean, how many of us have deployed a group policy setting? We just trusted that it happened. That's too technical for the audience, but you probably don't trust Microsoft completely. Anyway, so this concept is coming up in a lot of my compliance focused conversations that auditors are now asking for, hey, show me the change history for this individual setting over the last year. How is that possible if they really don't look at the configurations? I have heard what's acceptable today is multiple point in time vulnerability scans, monthly, quarterly, whatever that is. But is that really continuous in your opinion?
it's not continuous, but you have to remember, and because I've been an auditor, and we just kind of go, where's the evidence for this, and we're doing our best. you know I'm going to put on my consulting hat for a little bit. No, we're doing our best. As an auditor, I'm like, no or yes, accepted, not accepted. But with my consultant hat on, it's we can make an argument that these vulnerability scans at this rate, these point in times show this, and I can argue that. But the reality is
Yeah. Yep.
that's
And
that's what we have right now. So I do, and as we as the timeline goes in technology, it stops becoming a good excuse because there's so much technology, and the price points for these technologies are coming down, and especially in our channel, in the MSP channel,
yep.
so many tools that are can be used for small businesses, that it's going to, just like everything evolves, threats evolve, but also technology evolves. This will stop, and requirements evolve. This will stop. I foresee it stop being good enough.
Are you telling me an Excel workbook with just manual documentation may not be accepted one day? Is that possible?
Maybe don't. I still work a lot. I have a lot of clients that still work a lot in Excel, so I'm not going to
No
go.
comment. We'll move on. We'll crop that part out for the recording. No, that's perfect. Let's go to this next setting here. So we have origins or host name patterns, for which restrictions on insecure origins should not apply, is set to disabled. So again, this seems like something that's intentionally allowing you to break policy. Is that what this is saying?
Yes, these a lot of these. I don't even know why it would be in there. Like, you can't just, unless you just want to have every single gate in your yard open for no reason whatsoever. And the fact that, I think part of the problem is that because it's so like, duh, we want to have, this should not be on, but you have the option to have it on. And if you just set and go and you didn't check this one in particular, this is why it's so important to make sure it's set to disabled. It is.
I agree with that too. And I love your example. The fences being open, right? Maybe that is really convenient when, you live in a super safe neighborhood, there's never been a crime, and you always enter your house through the back door for whatever reason, right? So you want the side gates open. In that scenario, like, yeah, probably not a risk, but is it really worth accepting?
Yeah, it's, and you can also make an argument of, oh, I have a compensating control for that, even if this is open, I have
Hmm.
XYZ on my endpoint that captures it before it does anything. Great, but then we're talking about layered defense, and why layered defense is important. And so fine, I'll leave my back gate open, but the door to my house is locked. So if they get in my yard, they'll just be in my yard. Do you still want them that close to your front door?
Yep. I agree with that. And you said a critical word, so I'm not going to let that go on by. But compensating control, again, educational webinar series. Can you better explain what this means and when a compensating control might be needed?
Yeah, absolutely. My brain goes into files of all of these examples, and one that would serve, on the spot serve this purpose. A compensating control is if, and I'm going to try to use one that's different from this, is if you don't, you put me on the spot there, Zach.
Our live webinars, right? Take a breath. I'm happy to answer it for you. Just let me know.
I have so many examples, and I'm trying to like gather one that is like concise enough to say, because with when we're talking about I don't have IDS or detection.
Sure.
I do have IPS, and my IPS has this many, this many configurations, and then this tool gets it, keeps anything quarantined, and you can say, I do not have, oh, I have a great one, thank you, I just got it to my brain. I have, if you don't have a SIM, right?
Okay.
And because this is a real world example, we have somebody that they don't have a SIM. It really doesn't make sense for their client to have a SIM because it's such a flat, there's,
Sure.
there's
Yep.
not really a lot going on, but their requirement is saying you need to have a SIM, and they're like, well, we get logging and alerts, and we have them aggregated in the firewalls, and really that's the only thing in the network that we're really logging and needing to see traffic for. So, and we have a very good firewall that has all the alerts needed, and so instead of having a SIM, we have a compensating control that we have this level of logging, and then logging for the rest of the system, we have them here. And because it's a small shop or a small company that you're servicing, you say, well, we're getting logs here and here, and then we have a policy that somebody checks the logs daily.
There you go.
We say, so that's a compensating control for not having a SIM, is that you have somebody that by policy checks logs daily, and we have the logs for, let's say your firewall or in anything else, just in two different places. And we have that documented that we're receiving logs, and they're aggregated and they're being checked. And that's as good as this company doesn't need anything else than that. A SIM would be overkill for them. Period.
In that example, the auditor would say, hey, thanks for documenting this compensating control. You are not dinged, right? That is passing.
Yes. As long as you have the policy that's written that says somebody's checking it, you maybe have some kind of evidence that that person's checking it, that it's getting done, and that you have screenshots of the logs and shots of where the logs are and what you're looking at.
More data, the better to prove it. So absolutely perfect. We got there. We did it. All right, let's do this next setting here. Ensure suppress lookalike domain warnings on domains is set to disabled. At the beginning of this and in the back show, I mentioned these Chrome hardening settings, Edge hardening, browser hardening in general relate a lot back to phishing, right? We want to make sure if you click on an executable or if that fish redirects you somewhere, our browser is still mitigating the risk of that being successful. But Maria, take it away. How does this relate to a fish?
Well, the lookalikes really confuse the users. Like how many times?
Oh, they confuse us professionals too. I mean, there's good ones out there. Let's not rule ourselves out.
There's good ones, and it's just this conversation has been going on for way too long. I know that a lot of us have presented to clients even and say, can you tell the difference between this Amazon and URL and this Amazon, this domain and this domain, and it confuses. Why would we not suppress the lookalikes? Like, that's the whole point, is to not click on the wrong thing. And the more we can eliminate the wrong things popping up at us and filter those, why wouldn't we?
Yes. Even if it's a little, minor disruptive to the user. In this case, I would say it's a bit safer to make sure it's not accessible and them say, hey, maybe submit a ticket, say, hey, I can't get to this website. They copy paste and they write back, the IT write back and say, this is why you can't. Right? That's a little bit better of a process than just allowing it.
Yeah, and that's even the example you just mentioned, if somebody sends you a ticket, says I can't get into this, and not only can be an educational moment, a moment that you can educate your client, go, this is why we need another layer of security, and two is, to go ahead and start making, a list for them to, so you can start seeing, where all this is coming from, and making more examples out of it.
Yep. And you said the key word there again, education. I mean, this whole series is education, but can these settings influence potentially, right? This is hypothetical, but potentially influence a better security culture at the business?
Yes, of course. It is the practitioner's responsibility to go, hi, by the way, present again, educate their client, go, hey, by the way, this is everything that's been going on, and these are, things that we've blocked or that your users have. It can also be a conversation starter going, you have a lot of users not trying to get into these sites, or being confused by these lookalikes. Maybe we need to add another layer.
Yep, absolutely perfect. All right, next setting here, ensure URLs for which local IPs, I'm sorry, I did the wrong slide. Suppress the unsupported OS warning is set to disabled. So, I mean, yeah, it's going to be a notification that the end user sees, but probably worth them seeing here.
It is, and I see this a lot. How many users in the world are using outdated and unsupported OS? It is astounding, and you wouldn't even believe it. It doesn't. It makes no sense. So I think that hitting that disable, it's as bad as, like, 12 years ago, when we would just, hit okay every single notification, and just,
Yep.
oh, I can't hear this.
Yep. And I mean, to relate this back, I like trying to relate things back. I like video games, computer games myself. So like this is basically me trying to access my favorite game, and instead of it giving me a warning saying, hey, the server's down or the game's not working, it just lets me continue to try to work, and now I'm not getting the result I wanted. Like, that notification benefits me. So tell me.
Yeah, it's this again. A lot of them are just no brainers to, maybe us, but and we don't even know if they're on or off. But this OS one, again, no more excuses for unsupported OSs, and the fact that you don't want to be warned, or the user can continue using it, is a problem. It is a big vulnerability.
Do your updates, right? All right, next setting here, I think, is going to be the one I thought that was coming up next. My fault. But URLs for which local IPs are exposed in WebRTC ICE candidates is set to disabled. Anything that says exposing local IPs doesn't sound great. Any further insight you can share on this one?
So they have this WebRTC. It's this communication, this free communication between these devices. I think is, with no filters, no nothing. Logically speaking, and what we know, where we are in our cybersecurity journey as a whole of humanity and society, there's no place that you would think that there should be free communication, and having exposed IPs like that.
Absolutely. I mean, if I were to ask you live on this webinar to share your home address, would you be comfortable with that?
Absolutely not.
So why would we do it on our computer? Anyway.
Unless you're sending gifts.
Gifts are accepted. We'll look in the comments later.
I love the example you just used, is, would you share your home address? Of course not. And, we're in a world of privacy, privacy, privacy.
We got Heather, show me the messages.
Yeah, we're in the world of, keeping our information safe, because the more information somebody has on us, the easier, the bigger targets that we are. So this again is a no-brainer.
Perfect. All right, let's do this next setting here. So we got Another one that just entertains me that these exist, but update policy override is set to enabled with always allow updates, which is recommended, or CIS does have some flexibility here, still enabled, but the automatic silent updates. So this is basically saying, I believe, if there's an update, the policy needs to get updated and it's going to assure it happens. Sounds like there could be some risk to disruption if you're updating without testing first. Maria, what do you think on this one?
Well, there's always risks of updating without testing. And to be fair, again, I'm not a technical person. I had to learn that in my early years of assessing and being in this role because I didn't understand why. Again, I wasn't customer facing. I don't implement technology. I didn't do any of this. The auditor goes, do this thing. And do you have this in? Do you not have this in? So I saw when they would implement patches without testing them and saw the havoc that it could run on the users and the company. And that's when I realized, and I think it happened to me once. And I was like, oh, it is very important to test these patches before we implement any of them as a user that was disrupted.
Yep.
So as far as, and I think we are touching on a little bit of CIS doing compensating controls within their own, because they say, what do they say? You can have, you said update policy already set to enabled with always allow updates or automatic silent updates. So you could do either or. So maybe not so much.
Yeah, there's not a lot of compensating on this one, but
like,
it's
no,
okay.
I'm like, I know there's either or, but at least there's some room. Either way, you have to have updates.
Yeah.
The updates to secure system, we still have to put all the updates in for those vulnerabilities. Again, it's not as an open door, but it's maybe an unlocked door if
That's
you don't.
perfect.
So it's, if we're doing the gate and the house visual, it's not really opening the door, but it's making sure that it's unlocked and really exposing some of those vulnerabilities without having those policies updated.
That's perfect. And you said one thing that I think the whole audience needs to hear again and have a little further explanation. And I'm going to reference the slide on this one. I know the slide's a little small, but in the bottom right, you do see something called level. Level 1, level 2. There's some settings that have next generation and so forth. They get more and more disruptive. So when you see level 1s here, CIS has already gone through, did the testing, made the recommendation, and from their best judgment, this level 1 setting should be a high priority, something every business should have, and is unlikely to experience disruption. So I think this update is specifically referring to like the policies themselves. So this likely is going to be safe, right? That's why it's a level 1. This isn't referring to like the overall browser update or the OS update. This is specifically referring to a single aspect of policy override. So anyway, I want to shout out the levels there. And in the bottom left, I know we can't see it. I'll redesign the slides for next week, but we do have the CIS control mapping when applicable, and I'll fix the slides for next week so we can see that. But anything else you want to expand on that, Maria? Should we head to the next one?
I think that I don't want to expand. I did, as I went to go look at the slides again, and having those automated updates again, getting those automatic updates are also take out some of the MSP resource issue as well.
Yep. Awesome. Let's go to this next one, which is also going to be about updates. So I want to emphasize here as well, whether you're watching our workstation or server hardening series or browser series, there are so many settings that relate to one another. Doing one of them's cool, but like you're missing the whole point of configuring all of the settings. So this setting here, again, is talking about updates. So auto update check period override is set to any value except 0. So this, I mean, Maria, you can talk about this, but it's talking about the frequency of checking, but please.
Yeah, I was gonna say the frequency, if you have it set to 0, that means we're not checking anything at any time ever.
Yes.
1 is better than 0 in this case.
Yes.
Well, this is I'll go ahead and kind of tie this also to the governance piece. This is a huge piece in governance on checking set the update frequency, is making sure that it's getting done. And I, again, not a technology person. What is your recommendation for the frequency?
I rely on CIS. So if they say any value except for 0, hey, personally, I'm not going to worry about it. But I mean, this should, I would say, at least 30, but who knows, right? But yes, I mean, and it's an auto update check. It's not actually updating anything. So lower the better in this case, but each business owner, you have your own level of tolerance. So very good here. Let's head over to this next setting. We have about 4 more. So we're making perfect time with 15 minutes left in the episode. So control use of insecure content exceptions is set to enabled. Do not allow any site to load mixed content. So to me, this is sounding like it's making sure we actually control the content, which sounds like a good thing. But Maria, please.
It is. And so, if we're not checking what content, what can be coming in? This is kind of a trick question, but what kind of content would be very malicious that you may be letting in if you are like, that's a question, Zach. What do you think?
I mean, let's talk about it from your example earlier. You were in a library. I mean, what if we didn't check what books went into the children's section or check what books are in the nonfiction versus fiction, right? We don't want to mix good and bad or wrong category with wrong category. This is enforcing to make sure we never mix things around is really how I would present this setting.
Yep. And again, insecure content, you have it here. Insecure content can compromise secure sites.
Yes.
Because of the content that could be coming into it. It's just, I mean, it sounds like we're saying the same thing over and over again, because it is self-explanatory. Like, I liked your library example.
You inspired it right at the start. I was like, there's going to be a setting in here. I'll go full circle. But that's spot on, right? A lot of this stuff can happen out. I could be on a secure site, but there could be another thing running in the background or something trying to take over the browser, and whatever happens, right? That's why we need to make sure these settings are in place.
Absolutely. Perfect. And making sure that content is secure content, period.
Yep. All right, we got
avocados on a pizza.
That does not sound great. I love both of those things separately. All right, next setting here, one of my favorites because it has the ever famous Bluetooth. So control use of the web Bluetooth API. So CIS is recommending to enable, which means you are controlling it. And then they're saying do not allow any site to request access to this. So why don't we want random sites to have our Bluetooth API?
Do you want them to also have your cameras? And like, why would we want them to have our APIs?
I actually don't have an example offhand. That just doesn't sound good.
Because it's and I want to go back to these are really, you're like, well, that's a no-brainer, of course, duh. But if we're not going to check these, you could be having this disabled.
Yes, exactly. That's a big thing. This is not a one and done. Apply the template and never look at configs again, because these configurations drift. Malicious actors will change them. And those malicious actors may not even know they're malicious. They're your users. They're your employees. Stuff changes and you will never learn about it because things like group policy, Intune, PowerShell doesn't tell you when they change. They only push when you tell them to push. So these settings could be anything, and it's terrifying.
And you should also have a system to go check these settings. And I love the CISs. There are not that many, especially for this portion of it.
Sure.
We're at 12. This isn't a big pull to go check these settings.
No, I mean, you got the whole year, right? Of course, it's a lot of settings when you look at it from a whole, but who tries to do every single security layer in a day, right? This is not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. I mean, we talk about 10 to 12 settings weekly, but if you could remediate one setting a day, right? I mean, that's a big deal, right? That matters, and that makes a difference to your security posture. All right, let's go on to this next one. So we have, we actually talked about this one, I think, at the beginning. Talking about next one. Control use of the web USB API. This one, again, is saying to make sure we are controlling these things, because we don't explicitly say, yes, I want to control, it won't be. So enabled, and do not allow any site to request access. So very similar, but different scope. Maria, please.
Yeah. So we have it's very, again, like you said, very similar to the Bluetooth. But this is the Bluetooth controls like devices and different kind of your cameras, your microphones,
Yep.
things, anything that be Bluetooth. But now we're talking about web USB. There's data in there.
Yep.
So that inherently is talking more on that data security side. And if we do not have control use of it, then now we're allowing people to access data.
Yep. That is spot on. Yep. I don't think we need to beat that one in with the combination of the last slide, but yes, do this. Awesome. All right. Setting number 11 of 12. We are almost there with a whole 10 minutes, making great time. So this one you did hint at earlier. This is saying the default notification setting is set to enabled, which does not allow any site to show desktop notifications. Don't I want my websites to notify me of things?
Yes. So yes and no. I know that you have here, desktop notifications are distracting and invasive. And also, but every website doesn't need to give you a
Yes.
notification. It just they have, if you have everything else in place where you're blocking and you're filtering and you have the web browser set to certain things, I mean, you should be blocking any insecure content, or so I don't know why a website would have to give you so many notifications. And I think that in notifications, there's also a potential of having.
There is. Absolutely. I mean, we're not talking, I mean, this was going back to like our OS hardening days, but in the taskbar, right? Those little notifications and stuff, you can embed malicious content in there. But these website ones as well, you said, I don't know why a website needs to notify you. I mean, I don't either for the masses, but a lot of websites when I go to, it's like, hey, do you want to allow push notifications, whether it's my CRM or I think even YouTube asked me. Like there's a million and one websites out there, even if it's not the majority that will ask. And, it'd be better to have the default just automatically no, unless you explicitly opt in, which I think is what this setting is saying.
Yeah, and you, this isn't saying you can't opt in. It's just saying it's not just going to start allowing notifications.
Yep. Perfect. All right. We got the last setting today. So allow local file access to file / URLs on these sites in the PDF viewer is set to disabled. Local anything scares me. So why would we want to disable this setting as well? I need to open my PDF.
You do need to open your PDF, but you don't need to give access to it.
And what's the difference? Can you dive a little technical, or maybe too much? I know you gave me the warning.
Exactly.
I'm so sorry.
No, but for me, again, as Jersey, not technical. It's again data. Data is everything, and just like giving access to anything with data, you're giving access to your. They would give access to maybe anything they have PDF in your PDF file. So you can give access, and this you can correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
You can open the file, but then it's open and kind of only not have access to the file on my computer for all PDFs. It's kind of like when a social media application says, "Can I have access to all of your contacts?" No, you can't. No, no, you can't. But anyway, it's kind of data, and the data, and it could be intellectual property data that they have in PDF files, and now you've given full access to those.
You're absolutely right, and I think there's a larger conversation to be had, in a whole separate topic about AI and how AI is scraping everything. Well, it can't scrape the PDFs until you upload it to the AIs, right? So it's just dangerous, right? So that's a whole separate topic, but at least for this, let's make sure this is disabled.
And it just again, and like you said, just giving that unauthorized access. And I was looking at why about it. It's giving that unauthorized access to anybody to those PDFs. That's not just
spot on. All right, that is all the settings for today. So I do have a general slide coming up. A big thing that we do over at Senteon here is we do map these configurations to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So CIS does provide these mappings, and we take it to the granular configuration level. So not a lot, all of the settings we talked about today in somewhat form or another do relate to one of the MITRE attack techniques on the slide here. So Maria, you did a great job today kind of explaining the risk and the malicious possible intent, whether it's from a user or malicious actor or everyone else. But is there anything further you want to share on like what type of risk is mitigated by having these settings hardened? Or if you want to talk towards anything on the slide, whatever comes to mind here.
Well, I think I'm more comfortable talking. Obviously, the MITRE attack techniques, using the benchmarks is a great combination because it gives you, as CIS gives you the controls and the benchmarks to implement. The MITRE attacks gives you the techniques and it also explains what is, again, man in the middle attacks, server-side request forgery, and so putting those two together is a really good way to cover your bases. But if we're talking about risk and implementing those, I live in the world of GRC where we're constantly quantifying and qualifying the risk for a company. And it's not just for the technical side, it's the administrative side, all those sides. And I think that this encompasses all of it because you think of Bluetooth, I'll go back to that, physical security. It also has the physical security because, we have the cameras and they're on the network and things like that. So I think that lowering the risk overall of all of these touching even your administrative, because we've talked about documentation. We've talked we didn't say policies and procedures in general. I did talk about it kind of in a compensating control way, but having all of those all together lowers your risk so significantly. And it's when I say it's not a hard pull, disable, and then in 6 months check these 12 settings, that lowers your risk. And I don't have a I'm not quantifying it today.
I wish I could quantify the actual number. That's something like I have case studies doing my best, but like I wish I had those numbers as well.
It's impossible to quantify it in general. Like you can give a generalized at RSA. I did go to some sessions where we're talking about like, oh, they wanted to quantify in general, but the reality is that every single business is different. So I can't say it's going to lower the risk by 12% because maybe this place has very little Bluetooth. They don't use Bluetooth at all, or they don't have USBs. And you're like, okay, well then it still needs to be disabled. Or this place has 3 Bluetooth connections and this one has 50. So that risk kind of depends business to business.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean that it's not lowering it significantly by just implementing this. And also, again, looking at the MITRE attack techniques and seeing what we're fighting against a lot of the times.
Yeah, I mean, this puts a better picture in your head as to what we're actually mitigating, and it puts a picture in your head for your clients if you need to educate on them a little bit. Again, these slides are available in the resource hub. Just check that out in the comments. So that is all available. Rebrand it, whatever you need to do. Right. Anyway, one more slide here. You really talked about this, so we don't need to spend a lot of time here, but we share this all the time. I work with hundreds of MSPs, tens of thousands of devices, and 9.5 times out of 10, everyone has a default configuration set. No one that I've really seen, there's some incredible people out there I've seen, and I told Roy from Aurora Technology I'd give him a shout out. He broke the record recently for most hardened settings out of the gate. But for the masses, this is not done today. What would you say to the MSPs who don't do this or maybe are considering doing this? What would you say?
Having default configuration settings
to actually perform hardening. Yeah.
I think that you're doing a disservice if you're not have some default configurations setting for hardening. And even I like this, I do a lot of compliance. If you're checking somewhere, yes, we do. We harden our stuff, but you don't really have, you have your browser and you check the marks. That might even be a dangerous thing that you're doing by saying that you are hardening these. And as far as can I touch a little bit on the user impact?
Please.
For it? Time
is yours.
For the user impact, I know there's a lot of people like or MSPs that say, well, my user doesn't want to be impacted. The business gets upset if we cause any lag or any problems. And the example you use of them emailing or sending a ticket in that says, I can't get into this. I say that the more you get efficient, the more you harden, the less anybody is going to um, have to have a user impact. Like you'll get into a groove of hardening, and it
Yes.
might be hard at the beginning, but once you get into the groove with your customer, not only will you be hardening and securing and doing due diligence, but the user impact will be like there's a scale of how much less the user impact will be once you get going.
And I wanted to, I mean, again, obviously, if you need to hop off, I appreciate everyone staying for the hour. We're probably gonna run a couple minutes over here, but talking about the ROI from the MSP, right? Once you do get the handle on it and you're restricting how much that client is able to do in the right way, they're not going to be going to the wrong area anymore. So they're going to have less tickets inbound because they never got to the area they shouldn't have in the first place.
Yeah. And I know some people will say like, well, sometimes if they have, and when we talk about RI, I'm going to talk about it in a little bit of a different pain, is that, if you do have a smooth running machine, they're like, why are we paying? And if you try to sell them like the next thing or say like, hey, there are now more attacks, having some of this and some of it documented will help you explain and always continue that customer education and saying, or even saying, this is how much we've protected you from because of what we're doing. So keep that in the back here, because I know when it becomes I know there's wonderful MSPs that have, they're smooth running machines, and they
Mm-hmm.
have customers where like things just, they've got it handled and the customer doesn't feel the impact. And they're like, why are we paying so much? Or, nothing ever happens. Like we are why nothing ever happens, because we're doing things the right way. So keep that documented and make sure that you can say, this is what we saved you from.
That's absolutely perfect. So wrapping up here, I'm going to give you one more chance at closing thoughts. You did mention we didn't talk a lot about policies and procedures, but I mean, is there anything you want to leave the audience here today before I wrap up the show?
With the policies and procedures, I could have a whole other.
Anything you want. This is the wrap up before I do my closing slide.
I just I'm gonna give a shout out to you really quick. I think this is great education and going through these in a very comprehensive manner, and letting me speak on the GRC portion of it. And as far as policies and procedures is, just remember documentation sucks, but and I mean that's what I built my business on, is documentation. But we, do it. Again, it will help you be able to prove not only to your customers, but in any compliance situation. And then you're not, maybe document as you go and make a system for that, so that you're not having to go back and backwards and document everything retro documentation, because that's terrible. And other than that, thank you. And I really enjoyed today, and have really enjoyed working with CIS and talking to you.
Absolutely. And building your business on things that suck is a great idea. I mean, who wants to manually configure devices? So if you don't want to do that, maybe reach out to Senteon. But
Yeah.
very good. Let's get this closing up slide here. So we are here weekly. We are going to be talking about attack surfaces and content settings next week with Dave Royer. Then we got Brian Reese and JP coming up the weeks to follow. And thank you for watching this every week, or if you just here for the first time, you can get 100 free assessments with Senteon just by letting us know, hey, I watched the webinar. You can go to our website, put this in the website inquiry, and all of these recordings are either on our website or on our YouTube channel, which is simply Senteon. I think CIS Benchmarks. Should probably look into that before next week. But the links are in the chat as well. But Maria, you did fabulous. Thank you for being here. We might have to do a follow-up episode just about hardening and GRC, but we will get into